So welcome everybody. I am very looking forward to the session today. I had the opportunity to watch Charles doing this presentation. Terry shared with me a recording, and I love the presentation, and I thought that would be great for my network, for my colleagues to learn the work that they are doing. I know Terry for many years, and he's an executive coach, mentor coach, supervisor. He used to train coaches at Fielding, and we participated in different activities over the years. And always I respect you very much and enjoy working with you. So I feel very lucky today to have you here with us. And I don't know what else would you like people to know about you, and then you can introduce Charles.
Great. Thank you, Damian. It's a pleasure to be here. And likewise, great respect for the work you've done. And I'm thrilled to have us be a part of your network and being able to share this with your colleagues. And also my fellow graduates of the supervision program. I am one of Damian's proteges. I've learned from him a great deal how to supervise and have loved that over the years. I think, cohort two. Is that right? I believe
Yes,
it
the
was,
first cohort in English, the only one in person. We are starting
right?
cohort 28 and 29.
Wow. Yeah, it was amazing. It was such a good group. I still close friends. So one of the things I'm thrilled about today is emotional responsibility. And there's only been about five things in my life that I think have been truly life-changing and potentially globally world-changing, and this is one of them. So I don't say that lightly, because there's not that many things that I believe fit that category. And coaching's one of them, by the way. But emotional responsibility is truly a new paradigm. And I've been using it now for about 10 years, believe it or not, and especially the last 5 years with Charles Jones, my dear friend who I am thrilled to be able to partner with. And I'll be introducing him and more in just a moment. But I'm calling you today from Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, which I live in part-time, and thrilled to be able to see Damian next week here in Puerto Vallarta. So looking forward to that in person. But let me just say a little bit about Charles. So I met Charles through a mutual colleague who's also from Fielding, who graduated from their Ph.D. program about the same time I did. And I was invited to a meeting in Boulder, Colorado, where he was introducing this new theory of emotion, and I immediately fell in love with it, right away, and saw the potential of it, and began working with it pretty much right away, actually, like 10 years ago. And over the years, I've used it more and more and more, and it has transformed my own life. It's transformed my husband's life, certainly a lot of my clients as well, and I use it every day, literally every day, with my clients. And we are rolling out some specific training and coaching, and even an AI, which we'll talk about more. But Charles has been a truly brilliant, refreshing colleague to work with, and I'm proud to be able to be here with him and introduce him today. And Charles, please say a little bit about yourself, and then we're going to jump in just a moment.
Thank you very much, Terry. Um, Terry has been an absolute delight to work with in the last 5 years. We've brought emotional responsibility to hundreds of coaches, to several organizations, and it's always been well received. Um, and he's also been incredibly supportive and helped me refine the presentation of some of the basic concepts. I'm a behavioral scientist, and in 1982, I began researching peak performance and flow states. And those of you who are familiar with the term flow, it was coined by a psychologist, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, in a book he wrote in 1984, in which he really focused on what are the conditions under which people can enter that flow state. I took a different research path, which is the assumption that flow is our natural state. We're naturally adaptive. We are just forces of nature. So what is it that pulls us out of this natural state? And I believe there are two things that pull us out of this natural state, and I'll talk about them a little later on in the presentation. So I think to orient you to this, take a moment to just think about how many of your clients struggle with stress or conflict with other people, derailing behaviors. This is a broad range of things from procrastination to micromanaging to arrogance, whatever it may be, or who kind of take a victim stance about things. When there's change, adversity, and whatnot, they kind of fall into a victimhood stance. Well, it turns out the root cause of stress, conflict that's difficult to resolve, victimhood, and derailing behaviors, the root cause is the same. And emotional responsibility is a solution to that root cause. You can think of it as a fast and reliable method to increase your adaptive capacity and increase performance under pressure. What do I mean by adaptive capacity? I mean things like ambition, vigilance, assertiveness, civility, rationality, and resilience. And these capacities are natural to us. They're innate to us. And I'll tease out a little bit more how those can be strengthened. And then once strengthened, how you can use that to convert stress into growth, turn conflict into collaboration, shift others from victim to creator, and retire derailing behaviors. So here's the big aha, the behavioral science behind emotional responsibility. And this is, we're all familiar with the concept of system 1 and system 2. We've got a subconscious mind, system 1. We've got conscious mind, system 2. System 2 is tiny, can process maybe 40 or 50 pieces of information per second. Our subconscious can process 250,000 times more information per second, right? So it's our day-to-day actions, 95 to 99% of our decisions, routine behavior are driven by our subconscious mind. So this is well accepted in cognitive psychology circles, things like that. So what I'm bringing to it is, like Maslow, I believe the subconscious, or subconscious behavior, is driven by subconscious needs. And in contrast to Maslow's ideas that we have needs for, like a need for safety, I believe we have needs too, like a need to achieve the goals we set for ourselves, a need to protect our assets and mitigate risks, our need to assert the rights we believe we have, to personify our ideals on what it is to be a good spouse, a good human, a good coach, whatever roles or identities we have, to understand what's happening in the world around us, to learn from our mistakes, and so on. I've identified about 35 of these subconscious needs. And the subconscious does its best to meet these needs on its own using its existing programming. So for each of these subconscious needs, they learn the subconscious learns situations in which to activate the need, the actions to take to meet the need, the criteria to use to determine whether it's on track to meet the need. So for example, when babies are born, they have a need to protect assets, but they only know of one asset to protect, which is their body, and two situations in which they should activate that need to protect that asset, which is loud noises and heights. But as they grow, they learn they have to protect their toys, their seat at school, their reputation, their legacy, on and on and on, until there's many, many assets, and they learn strategies for how they're going to protect the assets and what to look for to know whether or not they're on track. And if they're not on track, the subconscious generates a negative emotion, a specific negative emotion, to alert the conscious mind, hey, conscious mind, we're not on track to meet this need. I need your help. I need you to use your metacognition, your rational thinking skills to reflect on the need that's at stake here and resolve the fact that we're not on track to meet it. Positive emotions also serve a purpose here. They're not just feel good, they are, hey, conscious mind, stay on track to meet this need. Stay the course. and reinforce the subconscious programming that's leading to us meeting this need, right? So I call this system our adaptive performance system. And when it's working properly, we go through life as a force of nature and in this state of flow. So you can think of it as emotions are real-time indicators of self-effectiveness. They serve a similar function as the lights on the dashboard of your car, right? So, if you see the low fuel light come on in the dashboard of your car, the low fuel light's not a problem, but the low fuel light is alerting you to a potential problem, right? And they also call on us to refine our performance. Negative emotions call on us to upgrade our effectiveness, upgrade the subconscious programming. Positive emotions call on us to reinforce it. Now, the two things that interfere with the proper operation of our adaptive performance system, two things. One is misattributing our emotions to anything other than the subconscious need that we're not on track to meet. And as I'll show you in just a moment, that in our culture, that tends to be the rule rather than the exception. Most people misattribute most of their emotions to what's happening out there in the world. And the moment they do, it disconnects them from the need that's calling for their attention. And the second thing is any attempt to regulate our emotions. We're interfering with the communication between the subconscious and the conscious mind. So I hope it's clear at this point, this is not emotional intelligence, right? Which encourages you to manage your negative emotions. Emotional responsibility encourages you to harness your negative emotions. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. So let's talk a little bit about this widespread cultural tendency we have to misattribute our negative emotions to external circumstances or our own internal thoughts. And this sounds like, I call this need disconnected thinking. And it sounds like, this is so frustrating. I'm worried about what might happen. He made me angry. I feel guilty about what I did. Now, the common denominator in all these statements is the idea that the emotion is being caused by what's happening out there, by some external circumstances, right? And when we're thinking this way, it leads to a state I refer to as emotional victimhood. And it's characterized by a couple things. One is, what are you going to do if you have these thoughts? This is so frustrating. That doesn't lead to productive action. I'm worried about what might happen. He made me angry. I deserve to punish him. I feel guilty about what I did. I have to punish myself. It's a very harsh, judgmental, and unproductive way of thinking. And in studies I've done at large corporations, 70% of the time that a leader has a negative emotion, they go this route of misattributing it to events and circumstances. In contrast, if you correctly attribute your negative emotions to subconscious needs you're not on track to meet, the thoughts are very different. I'm not on track to achieve a goal. That's why I'm frustrated. What goal am I not on track to achieve? How am I going about this? Do I update my strategy, get back on track? Do I rescope the goal? Do I change the due date? You're in problem-solving mode instantly. And these are subconscious habits. So for any given emotion, my experience is, some people will be in the habit, say, of correctly interpreting their frustration. Senior executives, they're largely on the right-hand side here when they're experiencing frustration. But you get to anger, 90% of executives really believe that the reason they're angry is because someone did something they shouldn't have done, when the truth is the reason they're angry is given what the person did or didn't do, they believe they have a right to hold them accountable, and they don't yet have a plan for how they're going to hold that person accountable. The anger, the subconscious is calling on them to put that plan in place to get them on track, to assert their right to hold the person accountable. And the moment they do, they shift from being angry to feeling empowered, even though nothing in the external world has changed at that point, right?
And Charles,
Uh,
going to say a little bit more about this. Um, so my personal belief is emotional victim is the number one problem in the world today, and especially becoming a bigger issue in the United States, because people are believing that they are disempowered and there's nothing they can do, and they blame their unhappiness on the world circumstances. But we know this isn't true because not everyone feels that way, even though they're experiencing the exact same circumstances. So we know that something else is at play here. It's not the circumstances, it's actually our interpretation. And how do we misattribute what we're feeling to the outside world versus our own ability to meet our needs? So once we move over to emotional responsibility, it changes everything. And my belief is we were more an emotionally responsible culture last century than we are this century, and it's becoming an epidemic, in my opinion. So this is really needed. Can you imagine what the world would be like if we stopped blaming and shaming and pointing fingers at others and actually looked inward and became more creative in meeting our needs and asked others to join us? Instead of fighting. So it would be a different world to live in. So that's my vision, actually, of seeing some of this happen, is that this is not just a personal thing, it is a cultural shift that can literally change the planet.
Thank you, Terry. So, when people fall into emotional victimhood, they're faced with a very bad choice, right? They must choose between behaving badly. So he made me angry. Well, if I act on that interpretation, I'm going to behave badly, right? And that leads to a certain kind of emotional distress and an inclination toward counterproductive behavior. So, what many people choose to do is, okay, then I need to regulate my negative emotion. But the problem with regulating your negative emotions, regardless of how you do it, is it lowers your performance, right? It's the root cause of procrastination, for example, or Pollyannaism, or tightening the muscles through which the emotion expresses itself in the body, leading to really stress and muscular tension and hormonal imbalance. Um, Breathing, very popular today, is mindfulness. Oh, I'm just going to breathe through the negative emotion. Well, the reason the negative emotion subsides is because the subconscious is interpreting that as, you know, he knows we're angry. He's not choosing to do anything about it. I guess we're not committed to asserting this right. There's actually now peer-reviewed research showing that if you breathe through a given negative emotion, you become less likely to meet the underlying need, not only in that situation, but because the subconscious learns from everything you choose in similar situations going forward. So people are actually kind of putting themselves on mute, diminishing their performance over time by using that technique. Or you can numb the negative emotion or dissociate from it. And all of these emotional regulation techniques, not only do they have downsides, but in all cases, you end up ignoring the need that's screaming for your attention, right? Um, so it lowers performance and it also reinforces trauma patterns. I'll explain that a little bit later in the presentation. Um, and so my belief is that the vast majority of, quote, derailing behaviors, things people struggle with in the workplace and in their personal life, they're caused either by an emotional regulation habit or this habit of misattributing their emotions to events and circumstances rather than their own unmet needs. Right? So, with emotional responsibility, when you're connected to your needs, you have much more emotional composure because your subconscious has been heard. Oh, he knows what need is at stake here. I can kind of relax on that. Um, and and you're inclined to do something positive. You're in this um, problem solving mode. All right. And that leads you to, oh, this emotion isn't fighting against me. This emotion's trying to help me. It's not only alerting me to the need I'm not on track to meet, but it's actually optimizing my physiology to meet the underlying need. And again, at this point, we have peer-reviewed research showing that if you want to accelerate innovation on a team, you encourage people to feel just how frustrated they are. If you want to sharpen people's ability to create contingency plans, you have them fully feel how anxious they are. There's a famous case study of this at Intel in a book by Andy Grove called Only the Paranoid Will Survive, etc. So if you're interpreting your emotions correctly, they are supporting you in thinking more clearly, making better decisions, and mobilizing to meet the underlying needs. So harnessing your emotions raises your performance and, again, we'll talk about this later, helps you actually retire trauma patterns. So emotional responsibility is a set of methods proven at this point. Terry and I have a ton of experience, individual clients, couples, workplaces, leaders, things like that, where introducing this into a culture, it actually changes the culture, really shifts from a victimhood to an ownership culture. And these methods train people so that they just more and more automatically interpret their emotions correctly and just, immediately move into how am I going to get on track to meet this need. So coaching with emotional responsibility, when you're using this framework to coach people, you can do the 4 things we mentioned at the beginning very, very quickly. So I'm going to give you a couple examples, some case studies here. My phone? All right. Clients refer to me, they run a real estate investment firm, and they were referred to me by actually his wife, who had taken a workshop with me in a workplace setting, a corporation that she worked for. And he came to me and he just explained just how anxious he was all the time. It was really, he couldn't sleep through the night. It was interfering with his family time. He had gone to see, 4 years ago, he'd gotten a prescription for some anti-anxiety medication stuff, and he was still really miserable. And so he said, I think I have this anxiety disorder. Can you help me with it? I'm like, anxiety is not a disorder. Anxiety is a superpower. At which point he was intrigued, skeptical, but intrigued. And so what we did is I took out the emotional responsibility anxiety decoder, so one of these worksheets for all the negative emotions, and we just began to peer into his anxiety. So anxiety arises when your subconscious has identified a risk and you don't yet have a plan in place to mitigate that risk. So I had him make a list of the risks that his subconscious had identified. And as it turns out, and I don't understand the technical terms here, but the amount of capital they had at risk versus reserves was well outside what's considered industry best practice. And so had a number of scenarios in which this could severely impact his business, take away his personal wealth, affect his family, things like that. So for homework, I asked him, okay, go home, reflect on your situation, and then come up with a plan for how you're going to mitigate each of these risks. He came back for his next coaching session, and I had him walk me through the plan. Not that I can understand it really, but so I could kind of watch his body language to see when his subconscious didn't believe that was going to work to mitigate that risk. He refined the plan. Within a couple months of putting the plan into practice, he was sleeping through the night, hadn't yet mitigated all the risks, but he was on track to mitigate those risks. And at the 9-month mark, he had restructured his business, had different ratios of debt to capital, all these various things. And his wife called me to say, thank you. our life is like so much better, right? And he's doing well to this day. I'll give you another example. This is going to be an example of a derailing behavior which was being caused by emotional misattribution. So at the end of a half-day workshop, one of the participants, an executive, came up to me and said, "Do you mind if I ask you a question about how to apply this in my personal life?" And I said, sure, what's going on? Well, this past weekend, my husband told me that he wanted a divorce. I'm heartbroken. I love the man. I want to stay married. And I said, well, why does he want a divorce? Well, he says I'm angry with him, like all the time. And I said, are you? And she said, yeah, I'm angry with him a lot. Why are you angry with him? Because he does this and he does that. Like, whoa. You just spent a half day learning that you're not angry because of what someone did or didn't do. If you're angry, it's because you're at a loss to assert a right with him. What right are you at a loss to assert with him? So she thinks about it a while. And then I could see the moment of insight, when your client clicks on it. And then immediately after that, her cheeks flush with embarrassment. She says, well, my subconscious believes I have a right to expect him to anticipate my desires and fulfill them. Most important part, before I have to ask. And I said, well, rights are social agreements. Do you have this agreement with your husband? Oh, no. Well, why does your subconscious believe you have this right? Because my mom thought she had this right, and my dad agreed with her. I said, so do you think you can convince your husband you have this right? No. Well, what are you going to do? She said, I don't know. So I said, think about the moment when you typically get angry. If you don't have a right to expect him to have already fulfilled your desires, what do you have a right to do? And she said, well, I suppose I could ask him for what I wanted. I said, good. Okay, so here's what I want you to do. Next time you notice that you're angry, gently remind your subconscious that you do not have the right to expect him to fulfill your desires before you ask, but you do have the right to ask him for what you want. And at least for now, I want you to immediately ask him for what you want. So you begin to create a new neural circuit there. And this belief that you had has been in your subconscious a long time. So it's going to take many repetitions of this before your subconscious gets the memo. And it skips the part where it gets angry and you have to remind it, and it goes directly to asking your husband for what you want. I don't know how long that will take, but just stay with it. I said, okay, I'll do that. I didn't hear anything. 2 months later, I get this email, subject line, thank you. And she explains that that's exactly what happened for the first 3 weeks. Somewhere along the 4th week, she was asking him for what she wanted without ever getting angry. And she was writing me today because he no longer wanted a divorce, right? So that's an example. Now, what I want to point out about this example is what I did not do with her is give her these exercises on how to manage her anger, right? We shifted what I gave her exercises to do is to meet the underlying need. So stop managing your emotions and start meeting your needs. It's the basic sort of approach here to retire this derailing behavior, one that's being caused by emotional misattribution. Let me give you a third example and talk a little bit about trauma and why I think this is relevant for us as coaches, right? So the ERA understanding of emotional trauma is that when our subconscious concludes that we cannot afford to experience a particular emotion, either because feeling the emotion would overwhelm our conscious mind with something it doesn't know how to resolve, or displaying the emotion would cause consequences in the external world that we can't bear, right? it installs a belief or behavior. It installs an emotional regulation habit to keep that emotion either from arising, or even if it arises, to suppress it, keep it from getting a conscious mind or being displayed. And here's some common reasons. As I go through these, I encourage you to think about how many of these you have, because I believe all of us have many trauma patterns, where the emotion would acutely overwhelm our conscious mind, or feeling the emotion would chronically tax our conscious mind. Maybe we grew up in a situation where we were neglected or abused for some period of time. And instead of feeling resentful all the time, we put a trauma pattern in place to keep ourselves from experiencing resentment all the time. We'd be punished if we displayed this emotion. We would lose belonging or status. Big boys don't cry. Enlightened people don't get angry, right? We would lose belonging or status if we were to display the emotion. Or we'd lose self-esteem or self-respect, right? Most traditions have certain forbidden emotions where, you're just not a good person if you experience those emotions. Or we'd lose focus on something we deem more important, like if the soldier has feeling compassion for the person they're about to kill, that could really get in the way of them doing their job. So they have to put a trauma pattern in place to keep them from feeling their compassion for that person, as an example. And so these emotional regulation techniques, when they become embodied, when they become subconscious habits, I'm calling that trauma. Those are trauma patterns. That's what trauma is. Not what happened to you, but the patterns you put in place to keep yourself from experiencing a given emotion. So what's interesting about this then is the subconscious puts the pattern in place when you can't afford to experience the emotion, but it will also retire the trauma pattern when it concludes that you can now afford. Circumstances have changed, your capabilities have gone up, whatever it might be, you can now afford. You know how to resolve the negative emotion. You know how to meet the underlying need. Then the trauma pattern is no longer adaptive. It's no longer necessary, provided the person has enough neuroplasticity in the area of the brain where that's being stored. They will retire trauma patterns. And Terry and I have seen this. We just work with clients and just help them to learn how to meet the underlying needs and then hold space for the negative emotion associated with that need. And sometimes it's quite sudden. In other cases, it can take several coaching calls. Let me give you, the benefits of looking at trauma this way is it doesn't pathologize trauma. When that pattern was put in place, it was adaptive. It's normalizing. Everyone has these trauma patterns. It's empowering. To retire trauma, you simply need to learn to meet the underlying need and resolve the negative emotion, both of which I believe are better addressed through coaching than through therapy. So I'll give you an example. So a very, very competent woman was being passed over by promotion multiple times. And she brought me in. It's like, why am I being passed over by promotion? My numbers are good, this and that. And when we talked to her boss about why she'd been passed over for promotion, it was like, well, I don't believe that she can exercise the authority and command the respect that she would need if we bump her up to this other position. Well, why do you believe that? Well, I have multiple instances of a subordinate not delivering on spec or on time, and she didn't hold them accountable. And I've been in meetings where a peer of hers with an inferior idea interrupts her and talks over her, and she doesn't do anything about it. She doesn't assert her point of view, and we move forward with the inferior idea, even though she had a better one. For this position, I need somebody who can exercise authority and command respect better than that. So when I talked to her about these situations, I said, what did you feel in these situations? And she told me what she felt in the situation. Not once did she mention things like, I felt angry or I felt resentful. I'm like, okay, I'm pretty sure she has a trauma pattern in place that's keeping her from feeling those things. So I asked her, I said, well, how often do you get angry or resentful? Oh, Charles, I'm not an angry person and I don't hold grudges, right? This sounds innocent, but that's a trauma pattern. And so what we did is I got her to agree that the next time she was in a meeting, when someone interrupted her, that she would say, "Excuse me, I was speaking. May I please finish my point?" And she had that opportunity right away, and she did it, and it went well. And then the next time that she was interrupted, she actually started to feel this emotion that she didn't even know what it was called. She's like, "Oh, I feel resentful." She literally never didn't even remember having ever felt resentful in her life. So she was getting back in touch with her resentment, meaning her subconscious had retired the trauma pattern. Similar thing with anger. Um, she had opportunities, and this took her more time. She had 3 times she held her employee accountable before her anger came back, and her subconscious allowed her to experience anger. So if you put yourself in my shoes, you have this client coming to her coaching call, and she's like, Charles, I felt angry. I felt angry. I'm so excited. It's like uh, it's a unique experience. All right, so um, we then began to work on her assertiveness, um, adaptive capacity. So not only anger and asserting rights, and resentment and eliciting considerations, but rage and enforcing boundaries, and outrage and rectifying injustices, a whole family of emotions. And their underlying needs is this adaptive capacity. And also having her savor how good it felt when she asserted her rights and felt empowered and elicited considerations and felt respected and enforced her boundaries and felt sovereign. We worked on this. And sure enough, at her next review, her boss said, "You've grown so much in this area. The next time this position opens, it's yours." Right?
So Charles
So,
going to say something a little bit about
yeah.
this. So I quite a long time ago described as being fully alive, because when we are operating under these trauma patterns that keep us from really feeling certain things, we're numbed out most of the time, and we miss out on really what it means to be human. So this is a becoming more fully human, becoming more fully alive. And for folks that sometimes go through this, they'll experience it in a stronger way. So instead of like becoming less angry, you become way more angry, or becoming happier, you actually become sad. But this is actually a breakthrough in being able to like resurface some of these emotions that have been frozen or suppressed maybe for a long, long time, even since childhood. So it is an awakening, but it is fascinating to see this process when people are beginning to really address trauma patterns and, like we call it, retire them. They're no longer necessary, but you're learning new skills, this adaptive capacity.
Thanks, Terry. Um, so I hope you now have a taste of kind of the behavioral science behind emotional responsibility and the kinds of things that you can do with it. Um, give you an example, give you one example of converting stress into growth, an example of retiring a derailing behavior driven by misattribution of an emotion, a example of retiring a derailing behavior that was driven by a trauma pattern, this embodied emotional regulation habit. Um, and these concepts can also be applied to conflict. Suddenly, conflict looks very different. It's like, oh, if I get my way, you don't know how to meet your needs. And if you get your way, I don't know how to meet mine. Let's get our needs on the table, get creative here, and collaborate together. And then the whole victim stance, you saw that with the emotional victimhood and emotional responsibility. And so, one of the things that is a very popular offering for us when we train leaders or leadership teams is how do you skillfully, respectfully um, shift somebody who's in that victim stance, in the blame and complain mode, into the solve and evolve mode. Are there questions you can ask them? And you have questions you can ask your client as a coach, and we have questions that we can train leaders to ask the people that they work with. Yeah. So we have what time is it? I don't have a watch near me. How much
We
time
have
do we have?
15 minutes, Charles.
15 minutes. So let's see if there's any burning questions here, and then we want to tell you a little bit for those of you who might be interested in learning more about emotional responsibility. So any questions? Maybe raise your hand if you have one. Your virtual hand. And is that Sophia? Are you raising your hand? Oh, no. You're working with your camera. All right. Everything makes sense so far? Thumbs up? This makes sense? What's really interesting about this is this theory of emotion. Like if you go to a psychology textbook or take a course in emotional intelligence, this is not the theory of emotion that you're taught, right? The theory of emotion you're taught is the one that leads to emotional victimhood. And yet, when I present that chart of the emotions and the needs, everyone's like, oh, yeah, that's obvious once you see it. But why didn't anyone tell me this before, right? And I believe it's obvious because that is the theory of emotion we were born with. And the reason why it's not, uh, why we haven't been taught that is somewhere along the line in human history, we call it a cultural virus, if you will, that has us misattribute our emotions to what's happening in the world, or to the more sophisticated version of that, the Stoic version of that, the cognitive reappraisal version of that, that our emotions are responses to the narratives we're telling ourselves about what's happening out there in the world. And I believe both of those are great misdirections because they disconnect us from the need that's crying for our attention. Okay, so we offer two courses, uh, same content, but one's a self-paced course and one's an instructor-led course. And both of them include a full coaching toolkit. One is the emotion decoder, and you'll see here on the left the adaptive capacities, and then groups of emotions and needs that comprise that adaptive capacity. And the better you get at recognizing those emotions, tracing it to the underlying needs, and knowing how to work with those needs, the greater your adaptive capacity. We have worksheets for each of the emotions that walk you step by step through it. When I'm working with a client, I'll often bring the worksheet up on my screen. I'll ask them the questions on the left, type their answers on the right, and then I'll email it to them afterwards. They have a record of what we've worked on together. There's a way to savor positive emotions that goes beyond what you'd find in positive psychology, to make the most of those, to reinforce the neural circuitry that is leading to your success in the situation. How you empathize with others, not at the level of their circumstances or their thoughts or their emotions, but the level of their needs. When you learn how to empathize with someone at the level of their needs, it's a complete game changer. For one thing, the person doing the empathizing isn't having thoughts like, well, you shouldn't feel that way in that situation, right? Because they've really focused on the needs. How to
Charles,
strengthen.
could I say one more thing about this empathy piece? It really moves empathy to a new level when you think about emotional intelligence. People often put empathy as an emotional intelligence skill, but this is completely different. You're actually helping people to properly attribute their emotions to their unmet needs and discover what their unmet needs are. And as a coach, you can then coach them to either change the need, drop the need, or meet the need. So it quickly turns into a coaching conversation and not just a oh poor you session or a sympathy session, where you're listening only, but you're actually helping them harness their emotions So it's a whole new way of thinking about empathy. It's a pretty radical transformation for what empathy is and how to use it in the world. And it becomes quite productive.
So at this point, I've had students who, have previously studied any number of gone through different coaching schools, different techniques. And one of the things they consistently tell me is that up front, they're using emotional responsibility all the time just to get to the heart of the issue, to get to what we call the needs at the bottom of the stack. And not only does that bring like enormous clarity, but once they're working with the needs, they can bring in all the other coaching skills that they have. Um, and in order for someone, from my point of view, a good coach is someone you know you've done a good job when your client actually changes their behavior. There's an enduring change in their behavior that improves their quality of life, their effectiveness, etc. And when you can connect the client's mind to the conscious mind to the subconscious need that they're trying to meet, they're receptive to changes in belief and strategy at a whole nother level if they haven't connected with that need. Um, let's see. Uh, Something I often do with clients is if there's an upcoming challenge where they anticipate that, they might derail, they might have a fight, flight, freeze, appease response, whatever it might be. I've got this step-by-step process to prepare them to maximize the probability that in the heat of the moment, when the pressure is on, they will behave the way they would have if they had all the time in the world to reflect on the situation and make some conscious choices. And then how do you debrief that to maximize their learning, to reinforce what worked, to rewire the things that didn't? How to retire derailing behaviors due to misattribution or to a trauma pattern. And all this content, all these worksheets and stuff are accompanied by about 3.5 hours of video that just are walking you step by step with some examples through how to do these things. So the self-paced version of the course is just gives you 3 resource development hours if you're looking to renew your ICF coach certification, and costs $450. The instructor-led version, you get all that plus 4 practice sessions. So it'll be you, another coach that's learning this, and me meeting 4 times. There's like 4 chunks of content, and so you do the self-paced thing for a week. We meet for an hour and a half, and then you take turns coaching each other, and I kibitz, maybe demo, but to really get this in your bones, to have it be experiential, to know it's also like to be on the receiving end of this. What I think was probably not communicated by this webinar is actually very somatic and visceral. When you get people to actually recognize what they're feeling and then connect to the needs, they feel it in their body. Very quickly, you'll see people drop out of their heads and into their body. And then after you finish the formal training, you get 3 60-minute supervision calls with me that you can use as coaching calls for yourself or to review challenges you're having with clients and things like that. This gives you 10 resource development hours and is $14.50. And those of you who are interested in becoming certified, we have a path you can take. You don't have to do any more training. You just have to demonstrate competence in the use of it. And once you've done that, you can resell our products and services. One-on-one coaching, team training and coaching. We have a new leader training program, self-paced course, performing under pressure for individual contributors. Train the trainer. This gets into corporations. It tends to spread because once you have seen emotional victimhood, it's hard to unsee it. And when you see it in the people that report to you, you want them to get trained in this, right? It begins to really annoy and bother you. And in some cases, Terry and I recently worked with a division of the VA, and it was a culture change project. And then we have a AI coming in April to walk people through these processes that you can resell to your clients. Um, so we're offering those of you who are, have been students of Damian, if you want to receive a 20% discount, I will, in a moment, drop into the chat. I guess I can do that now. I'll drop into the chat some links you can use if you want to take advantage of this, or if you'd like to get a 9-month subscription to the AI at a discount.
Do you know, Charles, there are a couple of people in the call today that are not graduates from my programs, and you can still offer that to them if they want to do it. Would that be okay?
Sure,
Yeah.
absolutely.
If you just let
Friends
them know
of
you were
friends of
here today,
Damian.
just for being here today, you may access that.
Thank you.
So,
All right. And it really is one of these things that has to be experienced to be believed. So if you'd like a half-priced coaching call with either Terry or I, you can get that at half price. And if you don't make what you consider to be a breakthrough, we'll give you a full refund. And fingers crossed, we haven't had to do that yet. Yeah.
Let me
So,
just say a little bit about that. I have, I have a PhD in social science and I've been doing consulting for like 30 years. And this is the only tool that I've never seen fail, believe it or not. I've seen just about everything else fail, but this always works. And it's kind of a miracle, actually, in some ways. It's the only thing I've found that always works because it's so fundamental to who we are as a human being that it taps into, those fundamentals. So it's quite amazing to see, actually.
well, I had experience with Terry. Terry coached me in one thing using this model, and I was blown away. I really liked it very much. That's the reason why I invited them to come over and get to meet you, and so people can learn from this opportunity. So we need to start wrapping up. Any final words? Anything you want to say before we go?
um, I saw one question in the chat, which I'll answer, is why I believe that retiring trauma patterns is best done by coaching. Um, and the reason for that is so in the example I gave of the meek manager that had these trauma patterns that were keeping her from experiencing her resentment and anger, what did I do? Skill building. Here's how you assert your rights. Here's how you elicit consideration. And if someone has a trauma pattern, then the underlying need is in a state of arrested development because it doesn't learn and grow unless it's in communication with the conscious mind. So her strategies for asserting her rights and eliciting considerations were a 5-year-old strategy, right? At this point, I learned from her that she grew up in a household with an authoritarian father who would hit her anytime she showed anger or resentment. So she literally wasn't able to feel these assertive emotions, to have them. Um, but notice what I didn't do is go back into her past. I didn't need to know that. We don't need the story from the past. We don't need the memory. We don't, right? We don't need all that psychological, therapeutic kind of stuff. There's no psychotherapy. It's just, okay, once we've identified what the need is, how do we strengthen your ability to meet that need and the circumstances you're in and wider circumstances? And the better able you are to meet the need, the more confident the subconscious becomes that if you're not on track to meet the need, the conscious mind can do its work to quickly get you back on track to meet that need. So from that point of view, the modality, I train therapists in this so that they can coach their clients through retiring trauma patterns.
Thank you. Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Terry, both of you for being here with us today. Thanks, everybody who came and participate and join us. I know a couple of people came late. The recording will be available. You can find it in YouTube. Is it okay, Charles? Terry, is it okay to share in YouTube with the
Sure.
world? Good.
Sure.
And I had
Terry
a
and I are on a mission to get as many people to adopt emotional responsibility because we have seen in our own life with the people around us, with the clients we worked with, it changes people's lives. We present this, oh, this is enlightening. They start using it, oh, this is empowering. A little while later, this is transformative. Like I'm behaving differently. And how do we get this out to the rest of the world? So yes, please share far and wide.
And I think most people here receive my newsletter, but if you do not, the link to subscribe to my newsletter is here. So in that way, when I share every month, it's coming up in next week, the next month one, I share the recording from the previous month. I share the invitation for the next month and the recording from the previous month. So in that way, the recording will be my newsletter too. So you will receive it if you don't not subscribe. So thanks everybody. And
thank you all.
I hope that people who attended today benefit from learning about that. And if you have any questions, you can also reach Terry or Charles I'm sure they will be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Damian.
Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone.